there's like 30 people in the room that are like, who's this guy? You got to bear with me a minute because I have this really weird, surreal feeling right now. I feel like I should be preparing like, oh man, I don't have lesson plans for my second period class. I guess I'm just going to walk in the door and speak Spanish and say, journal time, freshman Bible. Freshman Bible students last year should get that, but anyways, so I just have this really weird, like, it's a little surreal for me. But if you don't know me, I taught here the last 4 years and then recently moved on to Fresno Pacific University where I coach basketball. And there's something powerful about this place. This has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about, but I just feel this urge to speak from my heart. And I knew it when I walked back on this campus just now, and I've been, Mr. Kersey asked me to speak back in August, and it's something that I've dwelt on a little bit. So I'm going to circle back to that in just a minute because my mind doesn't work like a normal person's at all. So one of the things I found, I coach college basketball now, and one of the things that's really compelling and powerful is the guys you get to coach and work with every day, they chose you. They chose you. So there's almost like this instant power in that. I feel a huge obligation to the guys on my basketball team, because they chose us. They chose us. And they didn't have to. All of them had other options, and they chose us. So what happens there is this instant compelling relationship and mentorship. There's this instant obligation, and I care for them deeply and passionately because they chose to be mentored by me. The first week of school, we had guys moving in, and we have a kid from Michigan who moved out here. So his parents drove him out here, and they were getting ready to go to the airport to fly back. And mom walks into our offices, our coach's office, and just falls apart on my head coach's shoulders, just like weeping and sobbing, which you're like, okay, that's mom stuff, like whatever, right? We have another kid whose dad is like, trying to be politically correct here, but like he's tattooed all up. He's got them all down his sleeves. He's got a neck tattoo. The guy is in the baggiest jean shorts I've ever seen all the time. He carried a towel everywhere on the kid's recruiting visit, right? Like just the toughest, hardest looking dude you'd ever seen. And when it came time for him to go home and leave his son at college with us to care for him, the same thing happened. He walked into our office and he just bawled his eyes out and snotted all over my head coach's shoulder, right? There's this power in this choice. And so what happens is this instant thing. And the reason I tell you those stories is either you chose to be here or somebody chose it for you. And everybody in the room who works and wears that Immanuel Royal blue and red knows it. And so what I'm pleading with you for, and I understand, right? Whether you just, I don't really want to be here, or the repetition of, twice a week chapel has worn out. Will you sit where the water runs deep, because the water runs deep here? Will you let this place transform your life? It's been doing it for 70 years. I worked here as a staff member, and it absolutely transformed my life because I allowed people like Mr. March and Mr. Canuck to pour into my life. Because that's all they want. They just want you to be open to them serving and mentoring and loving you. That has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about, but I think it needs to be reminded that you are in a place where the faith runs deep, and you are blessed to be here. And I understand you hear that all the time. I understand that going to chapel twice a week and doing life groups and Bible class and all that can sometimes feel like a lot. But I would just plead with you, as someone who spent 4 blurs of a years here, I would plead, will you let this place transform your life, because you chose to be here and your staff knows it, and they carry that burden very, very seriously. That's just me being passionate. It's not what I want to talk about. So about the second week of school, I'm sitting in my office, and again, that choice thing, right? We've got a guy that chose to come to our university, and he walks into my office, and he says, Coach, I'm really struggling with my JCC class. At Fresno Pacific, you have to take a class called Jesus in the Christian Community. It's required. Every student has to take it. He says, Coach, I'm really struggling with this class. Can we talk? Absolutely, big fellow, we can talk. And this is big old 6'8" kid, and he kind of slouches down in his chair and is like, bruh, how do we know Mary was really a virgin? And I'm like, excellent question, right? And so what happens is the power of choice, right? I feel this obligation to him. This is a young man who I want to have the best possible experience. And he's slouched in the chair trying to fold 6'8" into a chair made for someone 5'7". And we're sitting there having this dialogue, and what comes out of this dialogue is the fact that he's like, Coach, I absolutely believe the Bible, 100%, most of the time. But there are nights when I lay awake and I wonder, did this stuff really happen? There are nights when stuff goes wrong. His older brother's in prison, and I go, is this all for real? Is this legit? So before, I'm going to talk about unshakable faith because it's your theme for the year. But before I get there, I just want to give a disclaimer and say, if that's you, because then he followed up with the question, does that mean I'm not a Christian? And we had this hour dialogue, and that scene has repeated itself about every week or every other week. He walks into my office right after he gets out of his JCC class, and I know right away where the conversation is going because he's got that look on his face. Bruh, we were talking about Matthew, and I'm so confused. Okay. So I would give a disclaimer before I start to talk about unshakable faith. Unshakable faith does not mean that you're like, oh yeah, it's easy, I believe it all the time, all of that. I want to give that disclaimer before I get too down the road because I know that would have been me. It's okay to have that. How many of you know who Mother Teresa is? Can I get a hand raise? Man, I used this reference the other day with it's generational. Anyways, Mother Teresa's a saint. I'm getting old. I turned 30 last month, and now I'm convinced that I'm on the downward slope. It's coming fast for me like a hurricane. What am I talking about? Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa is a renowned saint in the Catholic Church. She devoted her whole life to service, and she's often held on this pedestal as like the ultimate example of faith. And what happened is she asked when she passed away that her journals be published. And you know what most of her journals dealt with? They dealt with her own struggle and doubt. Stuff's normal. Stuff's normal. It doesn't mean your faith is any less genuine. It means you have a depth of wrestling that you got to stick through the process and be willing to fight through a little bit. This is from Mother Teresa's journal. I'm going to read you a little excerpt, and then we'll finally read the Bible. Where is my faith? Even deep down, right in, there is nothing but emptiness and darkness. My God, how painful is this unknown pain? It pains without ceasing. I have no faith. I dare not utter the words and thoughts that crowd in my heart and make me suffer untold agony. So many unanswered questions live within me. I am afraid to uncover them because of the blasphemy. If there be a God, please forgive me. This is like someone renowned in the church for her faith, right? Just struggling with the depths of reality and willing to just cling to the truths she has, even as she struggles through it. I'm going to read you Matthew 4. Some of you will be really familiar with this passage. It's Jesus in the wilderness, and he's going to be tempted. He has this altercation with the devil. And I read you this passage because if we want to talk about unshakable faith, we should probably look to the author of that faith, and we should probably look to him in a time of adversity and conflict, right? Adversity introduces a man to himself. It's really easy to be joyful and loving and caring and kind and high character when things are going great for you. It's another thing when life gets real, when it gets some depth. So let's look at Jesus in times of adversity. You can look at Jesus right before the cross too, obviously. That's a time of adversity. But this is a direct conflict that I think we can parse some things out of in regards to unshakable faith. So I'm just going to read it for you. Matthew 4. Then Jesus was led out into the wilderness by the Holy Spirit to be tempted there by the devil. For 40 days and 40 nights he ate nothing and became very hungry. Then the devil came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, change these stones into loaves of bread." But Jesus told him, "No, the scriptures say people need more than bread for their life. They must feed on every word of God." Then the devil took him to Jerusalem, to the highest point of the temple, and said, "If you are the Son of the God, jump off. For the scriptures say he orders his angels to protect you, and they will hold you with their hands to keep you from striking your foot on a stone." Jesus responded, the scriptures also say, do not test the Lord your God. Next, the devil took him to the peak of a very high mountain and showed him the nations of the world in all their glory. I will give it all to you, he said, if only you will kneel down and worship me. Get out of here, Satan, Jesus told him, for the scriptures say you must worship the Lord your God, serve only him. So what we find here is Jesus' faith being questioned, being tested. And Jesus' first reflex is to go, the scriptures say, the scriptures say, the scriptures say. He holds fast and true to this idea of unshakable faith. He's unwavering, which is great. It's really solid. But I think there's other things we could pull from that in regards to the way he's unshakable in how he handles his conflicts. The first thing Jesus does in responding to this conflict is he's almost dismissive. Like, hey, I'm not doing this with you. I'm not having this discussion, this argument. Does everyone have that friend who's like, wants to antagonize everything? Just wants to argue for the sake of arguing? I know a couple of you are like that. Just wants to argue just for the sake of arguing. Micah Braden. In fairness, I'm the same way as Micah, so it's pretty fun. Right? But Jesus is almost the alternative of that, the opposite of that, like I don't want to get caught up in this pride contest with you. The second thing is Jesus is steadfast. He doesn't need anybody else's assurance. I'm going to say that again. He doesn't need anybody else's assurance. I think when I think of unshakable faith, the first thing I think about sometimes when I think about that phrasing, I almost think about how we're perceived, right? Like unshakable faith comes out in these times when we need to make sure that everybody knows we have unshakable faith. Does that make sense? And I think sometimes if we think of it that way, we miss the point, right? It's something internal. It's an opportunity where you're here, where the waters run deep, to have your faith cemented, because it will be tested. For most of you in this room, it's been tested pretty severely already through whatever causation. And it will continue to be through the rest of your life. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in our posturing of our unshakable faith, our desire for others to perceive us to have this depth of faith and understanding, that we fail to cultivate. That's what is internal. That's what we're really called to. Jesus needs no self-assurance. He doesn't need assurance from the devil. Not interested in it. He doesn't need to be affirmed by anyone else. He's resolute and steadfast in what he's been given. Third, Jesus is humble. Jesus could, I partly read this passage and get dumbfounded a little bit, like, wait, what? Why doesn't he just end this thing? This is the God of the universe. Why isn't he just in this thing? But Jesus has no desire, we call it, sometimes we use the word peacocking. Jesus doesn't need a peacock. He doesn't need to puff his chest out and prove who's the boss, which is something we do a lot in our society, right? He has no desire to do that. He's gonna have conflict and humility. He doesn't need Satan to know who's in authority and who's in control. That's faith that's unshakable. In the midst of conflict, to be able to do that is pretty impressive. Fourth, Jesus is patient. Doesn't need to be anywhere else but where his feet are. He's fully present. He's patient and he waits it out. And then fifth, and maybe most impressively, Jesus trusts the process. He trusts the process. He waits it out. Again, this is the God of the universe who's been given all power known to man, and he could end this thing right now. But he knows that would be giving in to something that isn't the plan, and he's going to stick to the plan. And so what we see through preparation of Jesus is this idea of trusting the process. Some of you sit here and you walked in the door today and you've got immense pain and hurt from somebody. Parents, siblings, friends, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever. You have immense pain and hurt. Some of you, thank God, have been shielded from that up until now. But at some point, you're going to experience that. And will your faith be that unfazed? will you be committed to seeing it out even when it freaking sucks? Is what I would ask you. The other thing I would say about unshakable faith is that it doesn't happen overnight along these lines, right? This journey, hopefully all of you are on, is something that takes time and patience and opportunity to grow, to have your faith rooted deeply in that which is most important. That's a process. It's absolutely 100% a process. So I would just call you, I would just plead with you as you go through this year. I love that we do themes here, Immanuel. Yes, said we. I love it. One of my favorite authors is a guy named John Gordon, and John Gordon challenges people every year to choose one word for the entire year. One word. And try to live that. What you find is this really transformative value in your life. And so I would just plead with you, as you go through this year, would you contemplate with me what unshakable faith means for you? Does it mean some sort of false bravado, making sure everybody knows that you have this faith? Does it make sure proving to other people that you have faith? Or does it mean this inward cultivation? So that when you have your time of conflict, when things come up, when they go this way, when they do all those things, that you would be steadfast and resolute in your unshakable faith because of your commitment to it. A great example for me, those of you that had me in class, you know I can't get on stage and not talk about my son. So my son's a genius. He's almost 3, and I'm pretty sure if we tested his IQ, he'd score way higher than anybody in this room. The other day we were reading a book, and the book had a story of butterflies. And I said, yeah, and then the caterpillar goes into a cocoon. And he said, Dad, that's not right. He's not 3 yet. I said, okay, son, what is right? And he said, caterpillars don't use cocoons. Yes, son, they use cocoons. He said, no, Dad, they use chrysalises. He used the word chrysalis. And so we argued back and forth for like 7 or 8 minutes. And my wife was in the other room, and she came in and poked her head in and was like, hey, just so you know, he's right. I'm like, no, he's not. Caterpillar. Sure enough, I get out my phone and look it up. My son corrected my biological understanding of the world. Thanks, son. I appreciate that. But anyways, my son has absolute, resolute, steadfast faith in one thing right now, because he's still figuring out what the world means, although clearly he's got a pretty good understanding. He's still sorting it out, but my son is an incredible example to me of unshakable faith, because he doesn't know any better than to fully and wholeheartly trust me, which is a terrible decision on his part, but it's his instinct, right? And we're all given this instinct. And for whatever reason, by the time he's your old age, he's going to have the opposite instinct. He's never going to trust me, right? Because that's where most of all of us are, because the world beats that out of us, this instinct to trust, right? And so I tell you that story, and I could give you a million examples of him absolutely fully trusting me. If I said, hey, son, go jump in that pool, even though he can't swim, he'd run and jump full speed and sink to the bottom like a rock, because as smart as he is also how uncoordinated he is. He has this resolute commitment to what's in front of him. And if you think back, those of you who are blessed with a parent who poured into your life and invested you can remember what that felt like. You can remember that absolute trust and commitment to what your parents had for you. And to me, my son's a living example every day of how I should live, with this steadfast, resolute internal commitment and trust that the world has tried to beat out of me, that someone has my best interests in store. That when I take care of my business and when I trust that God is in control of the universe. I'm living according to what I've been called to do. So I would just encourage you in those ways today to have unshakable faith. Prepare now. Give yourself habits that equip you for when the world tries to snatch that faith from your hands. Because it will, and then it will again, and then it will again, and then it will again. And lastly, sit where the water runs deep. Sit where the water runs deep. I can't say that enough to you. 70 years of faithful service. That matters. And you get to sit in those seats and be invested and poured into by those people that know you chose them. Let me pray for us. Jesus, thank you for this day, God. Thank you for what an absolute privilege it is to be in this building, to know that you're at work here, to be reminded of how you invest in young people here, God. To be reminded that God's work happens here, to be reminded that unshakable faith is grown, is tended, is watered in this building, God. I thank you for these students who have willing hearts and minds, who desire to serve you wholeheartedly, who get those opportunities on a daily basis. I pray that you guide each and every one of them when they're weary and worn down, that they stay committed to the cause which you called them to, Lord. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for your love and compassion.